Welcome everyone to today's Flex webinar. I'm your host, Marcus Merritt. Today we are going to be discussing labor and the staffing assistant within Flex. Basically the labor module that can be used to help you assign staff to labor roles that you may be using and keep track of what staff you have assigned to shows and what you still need to fill or take care of. There's some other tools with that we will get into that. With that, we'll go ahead and share my screen. So the first thing that I want to discuss in this is the overall of how the linking and connecting these items works, okay, how we get that together. We start this in our services section in our labor. And it is important to note you can have other types of labor. You can have renamed your labor section as long as they have some of the proper settings, specifically that they have a call time, then you can use the staffing assistant to assist in those. So you can do updates to your labor section for that. In this, we're just going to use the example of audio engineer, for example. So we're going to go ahead and double click to open that. With that, the key is we're looking at our roles. Now, in a default system, if you just barely signed up, yours would be like this, where it would have an example of labor or services, but you would not have much for roles. It would only have this stagehand. And we don't want someone who we've said is stagehand to fill an audio engineer. So we need to create the role that would accompany this. Now, one thing I want to state, it is designed so you can have multiple roles that can be assigned, but I tend to recommend that it should be one role per service. That keeps things cleaner. Now, there are some other places where you may have a different version or a different city, but it still is the same skill. That's something we may get into. So for that role, we go to our main menu, to the system settings, and then we'd scroll down a little bit. I've already scrolled earlier to skills and qualifications, okay? So these skills, we're talking about that. So in here we see we already have that stagehand, but I need a new one for my audio engineer. I can go down here to the bottom left and hit the add, and I can put audio engineer. I can put something in the description. Maybe I want to explain that this is a front of house audio engineer position generally, but the description is not required field. You could leave it blank. We're going to go ahead and say okay, and now that's add in there. Okay, with that we can go back to our audio engineer position and reload it. And now when I go to the roles, we'll see that extra thing and say, yes, I need the skill of audio engineer, the role of audio engineer to be able to fill this position. That's what I want in my one-for-one. Now with that, we have to go to our staff and decide who is capable or who has the skill of being an audio engineer, okay? So in this case, we're going to go to our contacts, to the employees, and I'm gonna set myself here to say that I have the skill of audio engineer. So on this, we'd open myself and we can look over on this 5th tab here of skills, and that's going to list the skills you have. Now, in most systems, you're going to start adding a lot more, and so that's going to be a little longer. Note, you do have the ability to kind of sort this. There is not a filter, but you can sort to kind of help find things on that. So what all I have to do is go in here and say, I'm going to turn on audio engineer. Now, with this, there is the ability to set a level, okay? This number can be anything from 1 to 10, okay? Nothing else, it only can be those numbers. And it's just a way for you to potentially kind of help people understand someone's skill level. Now, I've had many customers ask, well, what's a better skill, 1 or 10? It's up to you. Most people think of it as 10 is a higher skill, 1 is a lower skill, but I've also seen people think of it, we think of our technicians of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Well, then put them in as 1, 2, 3 and ignore the other numbers. Whatever makes sense to you, as long as that communicates information back to you that makes sense, that is fine. The one thing that's important is you see here by default, everything gets assumed to be a 5 unless you manually change it anywhere else. We just kind of force people to be in the middle. So in this, I could say, hey, I'm a pretty good audio engineer, and we're going to go in that 1 through 10 scale. So I'm going to say I'm a 7. I will state, you do not have to do this. The company I previously worked for, they use the labor module, but don't really use the skill because different sales and project managers have different opinions of different technicians. Some think they're better, some think they're worse. And so they just kind of keep it more on just helping to know who's available and what skills they at least overall believe they have. But that level can be helpful to some people. Okay. With that, we now have the ability to start to do this. Now, one other thing I'm going to put in here to state that on top of individuals like an employee, or we could put someone in the freelance labor, though I don't have any freelancers in here right now, you can also put vendors. Now, I've just added a generic labor provider company to this system. So we could open them and say, hey, these guys as a company can provide me stagehands. Maybe we say they don't really able to provide me engineers, but actually in this case, we'll say they can provide an audio engineer, but we're worried he wouldn't be great. So we'll put him at a 4, but in a pinch, I could get an audio engineer from these guys, but we can get stagehands. And we're even gonna overall do this and say they're better than average stagehand. We like this labor provider company, okay? And I just wanna show that for a slight difference in how a vendor works versus an employee works when we go to actually staffing things, okay? So that again is that first key thing of the 1, 2, 3. Now, the one thing I wanna bring up in this is we see that we have our audio engineer and it has the audio engineer staff. And like I said, it's you can, and it's good to put this default, but not required. It's good to do that, but like I say, in my opinion, I like to do this on a 1-for-1, and that makes it feel like the skills and qualifications are kind of redundant, but it does provide some versatility for some more expert use or some variety of use that can be valuable, but is not always used. The key thing to me is what I more commonly do is like I did on this labor provider. If there is a person or a company that can fill multiple roles, I like to do that at that person level. Again, maybe we say I could have the ability to be a stagehand, but we're going to say I'm not a very good stagehand because I complain too much because I'm more skilled than this. And so we really don't want to book me for a stagehand unless we have to. Okay. That could be that sort of thing. You could have a very skilled audio engineer who technically has the capacity to be an audio assist or an A2, but they don't want to. And so you wouldn't fill that in. Whereas some other person might be, I'm fine, I'll take an A1 job or an A2 job, I don't care. Okay. So that's kind of where we set that different levels, and I like to put our multiples. And in the initial actual service, I like to keep it on a 1-for-1, but that's up to you. Okay, so now that we have all of those pieces connected so we can make this work, I'm going to close everything except my demo quote here. Close my other tabs. So I've made this demo quote for this, my staffing assistant demo. And one of the important things I want to talk about this is the call time and how this is going to work. So on this quote, this is going to be a fairly common kind of example where I'm going to be planning to load my truck tomorrow afternoon. This is a gig on Saturday. Loads in first thing in the morning. We expect to be ready kind of midday, a little bit of rehearsals. It's Saturday evening, and it comes out Saturday night. Okay, it's a one-day thing. And then the gear is going to come back to the warehouse on Monday again. Okay, which means in my system, my labor is really only for Saturday, but my gear availability is based on Friday to Monday. Okay, and what happens on this is when I go in here and I go to add the audio engineer, if I don't do anything to override that, it's the thing that I've explained that those bookend dates, the prep date and the return date is what Flex grabs for all date ranges. It doesn't do any math based on this load in, show start, load out, or any other date. It's only that prep date, return date. If we were in the edit header, you'd see it's only these dates here at the top that we have our asterisk of these are required. But that's not actually when I want my labor to be. They're not going to be working from Friday afternoon until the other. So I want to show a couple tools to help be able to update that in a cleaner way. Okay. Now, one thing we could do in this, and let's in this example, let's say we're also going to put in let's say we're going to have 4 stagehands on this as well. So we're going to put them in, but actually change to be 4 of these. But again, they have the same problem of too much range, and that's not what they're actually going to be working, okay? So a couple things. If I add the items on auto, and I'm expecting there to be one labor section that I only need to update once, I can add all of the items, and then I can go to the options menu on that labor subtotal, edit the subtotal, and just edit the dates here and say, oh, these guys are actually just going to be working on Saturday from 6 a.m. Until Saturday. Oh, we got to back up. Saturday, and maybe we think we're going to be out by 11:30 p.m. Okay, for ease in that. Okay. Now, on some of this, if it was a longer show or maybe something out of town, you could still just leave it more blank and not have to set it to be precisely when they're working. That's up to you. But I want to show kind of that. You see, when I overwrote that, both of these crew positions had an update in their dates and times. Now, if instead, maybe for the stagehand, they're only going to be working for the load in and the load out. They're not working straight through this, okay? So maybe in that instead, I either want to add them a second time. I can individually just click into here and say, well, this one is for the load in, and so I'm going to change this, and I can add them a second time. But another thing that I want to show is sometimes maybe if it's a longer show, and so you have multiple days of crew, you're going to want to have Monday labor, Tuesday labor, Thursday labor, etc. I do know my days of the week, but so in this, I just want to show that if we're doing more of an example like this, but I'm going to use this as just saying my load in crew, I'm going to go to my modify menu and create a subtotal ahead that I'm going to say load in labor. And I'm going to set that to say that's on Saturday. I think the load in guys, that stagehand guys are going to show up at 6. And I expect that they are going to be done with load in and be able to walk away by, let's say, by 1. Okay, we think it's going to be basically that so a 7-hour call. Okay, that'll get us there, and then it'll just be the techs doing some rehearsal and some testing and tuning and so on. By that, I can then instead go to an insert and go to add my stagehands. And you see here, I just want to hover over till it says drop inside. And because I put that date time in there first, it inherits that right off the bat. Okay, so we see if I do that, then it inherits that right off the bat. And then I can do a similar thing for it where I can add another one. We can add another one for my load out. We're going to say these guys are expected to start. We think the loadout's really going to start at 10, but I'm going to call the guys in at 9 in case things end a little early or there's a little bit of prep that can be done. And then I'm expecting again that we're going to be done by 11:30 p.m. I'm not going to bother messing with the crossing the midnight for this. We're not really getting into talking about pricing models and tiered pricing and having to do that math in this call, and that would be more in there. So in this, for just a moment, we're going to go ahead and delete our other stagehand, and we're going to come back here and add our stagehand to this other labor for that. So I just want to mention that of kind of some tools and things you can use to help make it so you get that, because it is important to remember if you don't make that extra effort, your labor call, now it's not going to affect the billing for them. The billing is still trying to utilize the default time model in this and the default time field, and you may have to override that. But the time frame here that you're going to communicate to them as far as the schedule is going to try and take those bookend dates, and that's likely not going to be what they'd actually be working. Okay. Now that we've got those in there, we want to talk about how to book some guys for that. Okay. So we see in all of these in our conflict tab, we've got this. Oh, and I want to change these back up to 4. So we have our negatives on these. It's important to remember that these negatives do not represent that we don't have anyone capable of doing it, but that we have not booked someone. Because unlike our equipment that sits on the shelf in the warehouse and waits for us to plan to use it, your crew doesn't just sit on the shelf and wait to get booked. They have other lives, other things, and so you have to communicate and make sure there's no conflicts or availability issues, okay? So we can go in here. We're going to click our options on this, and we're going to list to the staffing assistant. The key thing, again, this was added and updated as of the patch today, okay? That's why we're doing this today. So we see in here that when I pull this up, it lists that I'm looking for one skill of audio engineer, quantity of one, for this time frame, okay? Gives me kind of that recap of what's going on. Then it lists who I have on here that is listed as being available. I've got my labor provider company that it reminds me is a vendor, or myself that is an employee, okay? Now, one thing that's an improvement on this, in the past you could search cities and states, but they didn't load here. So we've updated so it actually loads that data so it can help you know if you have proper addresses of where these people live or where they operate from, then you can better understand, oh yeah, this is a good guy to book because he does live near my gig, and so that's the good way that I want to do it. We have our levels here and our availability. Now, any of these can be filtered, so you can sort by them. You also can filter. In Flex 4, it was set to, you could filter by different fields. In this, it's just one search, but it searches all of those different resources. So if you know you were looking for a specific person, you can start to look that way and find that. Or if you knew you needed to look for a certain area, you could start to search by that. But in this, I have very few people, and so I can pick that out right away. And then, of course, that important thing of it stating our availability on them. Okay. It is important to note on this availability, this is not connecting to people's calendars. It's not connecting to any other kind of outer thing. It's just, have you booked them on other shows for you within your Flex system? Okay. There is potential of that in the future, but I can't make any promises on timeline. So just keep in mind that for the moment, it is only about knowing when you have booked them, and if you've booked them on some other show, you can't double book them yourself, okay? And if it's a freelancer, it's extra. You're still going to need to communicate and double check, are you available for this time frame? Yes, you work for us a lot, but I know you occasionally work for someone else, okay? So in this, I'm going to go ahead and just decide it's myself that's going to work this. So I'm going to click me and say, okay. And with that, that's going to correct this and say that we're now good. And I'm going to have created a child crew list for this. Now, one other thing I wanted to show is that the staffing assistant also can work directly on the crew list level. So if I want to just, because I've got a lot of other items on this quote, and maybe I have a labor coordinator that doesn't really want to mess with all of that, I can just push things to the crew list. And I can do that by going to the logistics tab section, their little truck here, and then say update staffing paperwork. And that will take it. It's not going to suddenly fix it. So we didn't change this, but we pushed all of these stagehand positions down to our crew list. So when I go and open it up, it's going to have a bunch of blank positions on there that need to be filled, but it gets rid of the other fluff. You'll also notice here in this, instead of having one line of 4, it's 4 separate lines for the other call, okay? In this, because if I book individual people, that person can't cover 2 things. And even if I book my labor provider, I can book them multiple, but to make sure I've covered every shift, I need to fill them in on multiple lines rather than changing the quantities. Okay, so in that, just as the same note, if I say, okay, I'm gonna go to fill in this stagehand and I want to book in, I can go and say to my staffing assistant, again, it's going to pull up and say, oh, it looks like I've got Chris Stein could do it, I could do it, but I'm booked, or my labor provider. And so I could set my labor provider in here and go, yes, I want to have them do it. And then we'll note if I go to do that on a second one of these, well, I'm going to have to comment on that because that's not working right. When they're a vendor, this should still say they are available. So I'm going to double check with the developers and we're going to get that bug fixed because as a labor provider, you're not assuming it's the CEO of the labor company or your contact at the labor company that's doing it. It's they're calling and booking people. So you should be able to book multiple people, and that's a bug in here, and we will get that corrected in that. With that, I just want to highlight that if you know who you want to fill in for something, you can just go into this and just start typing and just go, I want to be labor provider company. Or including in this, I could bulk edit. So I can click here and shift click down to this. I can open this and, oh, maybe not. They don't have the bulk edit enabled. All these little things that aren't quite over yet. Well, we will just get those filled in here really quick. I don't really need all of them, but I want to make sure I have one of the out, one of the ins, and actually let's even on this example, let's remove this one. So one note, if for some reason you put in a freelancer and you had put them in, let's put this back in to show this preferred way to do this. And then you called and they said, hey, I can't do it. I'm not available. And so you go, okay, I need to figure it out, but right now I'm too busy and I don't want to think about it. You can just use this and say clear, and that's going to dump it back open, and it will, the quote will know that that position is not filled, and it actually in this changes this quantity to 0. But as soon as I fill it again, it will move this quantity back up to 1 because it's filled. Okay, so that's the one thing there. It doesn't suddenly think I don't need it. It's just saying you cleared it, is all that's saying. You had it and you cleared it. As soon as I figure out somebody else, I can put them back in. But that will kind of help. Okay, so for the moment, we'll just go with that in there. So now that I have these filled, I want to be able to communicate to this staff and let them know what's going to happen. To do that, I can just click on the person I want to communicate to, or persons. I'm going to do a single one first, and then I'm going to show you as a group. And you go to the top right to the send to button, our little paper airplane, and click that, and it's going to pop it up to send an email to that person. It says it's going to come from whoever the person logged in filling this. So obviously that looks like I'm going to email myself on this. And then it's saying, dear Marcus, following the details in regards to the crew call you've been assigned to, that's the name of the crew call, that we've got, who's the account manager for it, some communication, client, venue, call time details, including also the position that we're asking. If you have any questions, contact the account manager. Okay. Note that this template can be updated, can be changed on that, so you can make updates to it if you want to change it. Also, individually, I could just go in here and type some extra information if I wanted to. Okay. The one note I want to show is that's what it looks like per person. But if I went to send this to everybody, so I'm going to put both of these and I go to send it, what it's actually going to do is, because it doesn't send one email to everybody that everybody knows about everybody's position, it sends a unique one to each different person. Okay, and so you'll see instead where it tells you the variable parts that are getting filled in differently, where this is going to say the contact first name, whoever is appropriate for it. And then the call time details will be unique. Everything else is shared, but who it's going to, and then those call time details will change per individual. Now, one other thing I do want to show, if we did it just to our labor provider, you'll see that in our call time details, because, it thinks it's 2. You'll see, even though I only have one selected, it actually notices both of those call times, and it lists both of them. Okay, it lists both that load in part that I could have had a note or something more to specifically say the load in. Right now I left it blank with all of those skills and tasks on there, and then this one here. But I could have updated these more appropriately to say, oh, this one is just load in, and the other one is just load out, and it would communicate that information to them. So it's clean that way, in that it shows even when there's multiple call times, because it's both an in and an out, or it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, they would see all of those in the one email. They don't get 3 separate emails even though to be on this list, it has to be as 3 separate lines, one for each call time. I can't make any one line say, start here, stop here, start again, start. It's an individual. So anytime you're stopping. Now, that doesn't have to include, you can have planned in these call times for meal breaks or things like that. But if there's an extended break, then you would want to do that as an additional line in there. Okay. And then with that, the couple other biggest things that I want to show is that we can use a couple reports that are in here by default that people like. The first is this print crew list. This is generally good for kind of the account manager or the on-site lead to just be like, I want to have that list of who it was that we booked, what's their contact information, if I need to call them, if they're late, I need to update them with production information, what's going on with that. So we'd see in here who we have on this. Now you see it's coming in just in the same order that it was listed. So we could do some cleaning or reorganizing. Obviously we have these that are unassigned that are in that. And we see that it pulls in, it's got my email. If we also had a phone number in here, it would pull that so I could call that individual, and it's got those call times and those labor roles. So again, this one is specifically good for the lead on the show to be able to have who they need to contact if they need to update them with production information. That's kind of a good handy thing for them. The other thing that sometimes people like, oh, of course, that's always happen when I do this, is this crew list time card. This is sometimes good when you're got a bunch of locals that are showing up or a bunch of others, and you want to have a better kind of a little bit of a time card or a record of when did people actually show up and when did you actually cut them. So that's going to build it as a little more of, here's their scheduled time slots, but fill in when do they actually start, when did they actually end, update that total amount of hours. I liked a lot of times to put in those times and then make them kind of initial next to it. And so you can have a way to kind of have a little bit, if you don't have a digital way to do kind of clocking or checking on people and your labor provider, it's a small enough call, they're not, sending a foreman to kind of manage that for you. This can be a nice little tool to help you kind of just double check on when are people showing up, when did you cut them, and make sure that you're paying for appropriate hours that worked, okay, on that kind of thing. There is also just the general generate PDF that some people can like and be helpful. I tend to personally like the other two more, but we'll go ahead and show that there. So again, we see here that's just more the labor role, the tech name, and the notes show up. It's a little more kind of just generic and straightforward. I tend to like the print crew list one. And then the other big thing with that is just to know if you start using this on a regular basis, the other nice thing is a global report in here where you can do this for the contact schedule. Within the contact schedule, you always need to set a time frame. You can either sort this by an individual contact if I just need to double check or communicate to a single person. I want to remind you all of the calls you have in the next 2 weeks or in the next month, whatever. Or I just want to, hey, let's just double check what's all going on for our crewing in the next 2 weeks, in the next month, whatever. Generally, if I'm doing that, I like to group by job. I think that tends to be cleaner. But sometimes when you're doing contacts, maybe you want it to be grouped by contact instead. That's what it will do instead. We can do a page per contact per job. I'm not a big fan of that, but sometimes that's better if you're trying to, hand off paperwork or something that kind of way to people. I tend to like to print notes and the production tasks, and you can filter to locations if you're, a multi-location place. This system is currently set up only with a single location. So on this I think is probably the only one that I have in here, so that if I just push this back a little and push this forward, we'll just see the one that will come up. But this can be another kind of nice tool to sort of look at big picture of what's going on. But you'll see, yep, I only have this one, and it only is actually listing who I've actually booked, not all of those other positions that I haven't got around to booking yet. It would obviously be longer if I had done that in there. Okay, so that's kind of the big picture of that staffing assistant, of how to get that to work. And with that, we will open things up for questions. If you book someone in the staffing assistant, does this resolve the conflict in the quote? Yes, it does. So let me go back over to the quote here and reload on this. And I'll show you that on both of these, my negative here is now down to 3. It understands that I've booked one of these 4 positions, even though I did that booking at the staffing assistant. So yes, it does communicate that. And if this was booked and then I cleared it at the staffing assistant level and I came back to the quote as the, account manager versus the labor coordinator, I would suddenly see it went negative and like, I thought I booked that. And, you talk to the labor coordinator and they're like, oh yeah, the guy you said you wanted to work, he said he's not available. So we got to find somebody else. Jeffrey Ponzo asks, can you send paperwork through this to the crew? Pull sheet, contract, etc. Not currently, no. You still have ability to, pull it and send it to them, but through this, main kind of send it out to people. It can't attach documents. It's not going to send. Well, that was on the wrong one here, but yeah, it's not going to send any of those attachments to it. And at the moment, I don't even think through a workflow thing I could do that because it could send reports of this, but it can't send reports of its parent or child or other documents. So currently, no. That is a good idea and something we will look for in the future. So Andrew asked, can the names in the staffing assistant be exported to QuickBooks or other programs for invoice billing? So the one problem with this, and it is something we've kind of discussed about and we are hoping to improve in the future, is right now the crew call is not in any way a financial document. There's no financial information. So while on the quote level, we can have in here what we're planning to bill for this person, and we may have put in something about an estimated cost for that person. That's going to be an estimate on that level if we put something in. Okay. Here I didn't even have. Now I could go and individually put it in, but you'll see if I had I can have saved on crew what their bill rate, what their day rate is, and it's not going to update this because we're only adding them to the crew list and it is not a financial document. It doesn't have any financial information. This is a thing a lot of people have asked of, hey, after I book this, I want to be able to better reverse figure out my profit margin of how much I'm paying for these positions. And it's something we want to solve in the future, but at the moment, it's not any kind of financial document, so there isn't really any connection to that. I have worked with some people to be able to, and it is common that we can add a labor PO as a child to this. And there are some other ways to kind of copy it across, but there isn't any financial information to jump down to, so you still end up having to do some manual edits. Can you update the time card based on actual times directly on Flex? Are you meaning this time card here, if we're just wanting to update on the crew call? So yes, I can just individually on each person tweak this here. If we're talking about the report is just kicking out whatever I have here. So if I want to update this, now obviously if I'm doing it after the fact, then I want to actually also go back probably and update the quote, unless I have an agreement that I'm billing only what I billed them for, and I'm just having to update what I'm having to pay out. But yes, both either at this level. One thing important to note, if I change the time on the crew call, that does not automatically refer and push back up into here. So yeah, Leon, the others are their PDFs. And so while you could either, have a PDF Pro to make edits, or things that, or you could make physical notes on it. None of that is going to go directly back into Flex. You'd have to update it in Flex and then kick the PDF back out. Scott Melnick asks, any notification for saying that an email has been sent to specific crew? I don't, currently there's not a kind of an event log, an event history on a quote. We have something in an event history of any time you run major kind of actions, and we don't currently have that on a crew list. So right now, no. Now you could, I believe we could set it up so that when you go to send this, we could plan some CCs of it going to some kind of email, so you can kind of track it through that. But we don't have anything that currently tracks in Flex whether or not you've sent out those emails in there. Sander is asking, is there a field where you can add a confirmation from the labor person, something like a status? So unfortunately, not currently. There is a field in there that was kind of an attempt and it doesn't really work. What I personally have done in the past and what I tend to recommend right now, one to note again is I don't tend to use these labor positions. That's just me personally. And so I tend to just use the notes to do something like a confirmed in here on a person. And then there is a status or a workflow process of this. And so I like to update the workflow on this and not start them out at confirmed, but maybe start them out at tentative or at inquiry. Maybe say once I've got all of my labor positions that I need to get filled, I move it to tentative. Once I believe I've filled them, I can move it forward to confirmed, something like that. But otherwise, yeah, I just tend to use the note section for that. That is something I would like, and I'm hoping we're going to add in the future of a little more of it. Is this confirmed, and a checkbox of yes or no? But currently, no, that is not something. Scott Melnick is asking, any status changes for the crew call positioned if there's a freelance crew member that's unavailable or the labor isn't able to provide enough bodies? I mean, as far as status changes in the overall, that can be customized through the workflow actions. For how to do that, we would just say to refer back to the workflow webinars or to reach out to support. But if you thought it was confirmed and you suddenly heard that back, you could add a workflow action to move it into a last minute need to fill. Obviously, also in this, because it's just a type field, you can put some kind of note about it. Obviously, like I said, you can go in here and just clear it of, oh, this isn't filled anymore, so I clear it. But then I have the reminder of I need to then, figure out some other position to fill it. But there isn't any other kind of major notification for that. Tim is asking, when will the staffing assistant be available under the projects dropdown? My understanding is they are working on that now after getting this part, but I can't be for sure on the timeline. But I believe soon, so don't hold me to it. Can we go over how to edit the default labor call email? Yes, the one thing on that is that unfortunately because it's more of a system setting, is still in Flex 4. And I didn't have my Flex 4 app loaded. So let me just really quickly go over there, but I am happy to show that. Yeah, Aaron's, while we're waiting on this, if this is gonna happen, Aaron's comment is very correct. Soon generally means 1 to 3 update cycles, and an update cycle is every 2 weeks. So 2 to 6 weeks. But things can always happen, snags can occur, and things happen. But yeah, my understanding is that tool is very similar to what they had to solve in the other, and so they're trying to just transition and kind of update the code for that. But I could be mistaken, so we'll see. So let me remember my own password. Okay, so in Flex 4, this email is under projects. Let some of the rest of this load. Email templates. Okay, these email templates include the send to client template, the send invoice to client, but also the crew call email template. Okay, so we can then double click that. One thing that is important is this has a much smaller amount of tokens that can be used for what gets pulled there. But then otherwise we can just go in and kind of update what's connected to this. Just to notice some very common updates people do. You're using this commonly for freelancers, so maybe we don't say that this is the details in regards to a crew call you have been assigned to, but maybe we change it to be requested for, because we don't know for sure if they're going to do that. Another common thing I see where a lot of people, we're okay with them seeing the name of the show, the account manager, the call time, but maybe they don't really need to know who the client is. That's not their thing. Sometimes people want to be a little more to hide that. Also, we maybe say, hey, we don't care about faxes anymore, and so we don't need to know the fax of the account manager. And obviously we could put some other information kind of down here to edit that. So there are a few substitution tokens, but not a lot of spare. The ones in the other places do not work here, but it should be able to get you what you want, and obviously update those and then save it, and that's going to just update automatically. So that looks like all the last questions I currently see. If anybody else has any quick questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, as usual, thanks everyone for showing up. Really appreciate this. And so if nothing else with that, thank you everybody for arriving. We really appreciate. If you have additional questions, you can always reach out to support@flexrentalsolutions.com, training@flexrentalsolutions.com, or visit our help center, and that will help out. Thanks again, and take care. Stay safe. Bye.